Welcome to episode 41. Last week I showed you how I started installing our new electronic windlass. So let's continue with that by first removing the anchor. I secure it with a rope just in case, and then separate it from the chain. Next, it's time to undo those 40-plus-year-old bolts on the old windlass. And then remove it. Next, I remove the loose bits of paint. Clean everything up a little. And then apply some rust converter. And of course, I put down a coat of paint. Next, it's time to mark the location for where to drill the holes. And then I move on to the drilling. I use a 25mm hole saw for the hole to pass the cables through. Man, those are a lot of holes in our deck. Next, I attach the bolts on the windlass and do a first test fitting. It doesn't quite seem to fit yet, so I have to work on that a little more. Next, it's time to close up the holes, which we don't need anymore. And for this, I'm using our good old glass fiber filler paste. And while we're at it, we're gonna do some small cosmetic touches as well. Next, I sand all this down. And put on another coat of paint. Now let's get back on the inside, where we have to wire the cable for the chain counter to the relay. While working on this job, I discovered these Wago clamps. These are especially convenient if you want to create a safe and secure connection that you might have to open or change on a later date. In this way, I can quickly and easily wire up the chain counter remote and have a safe connection to work with it right away, while still being able to make changes in the future quite easily. The last thing to do is to wire up the cable for the sensor. And now the wiring is done. Next, I have to put this little magnet inside the gypsy of the windlass. This is gonna trigger the sensor each time it's passing by, which is how the chain counter measures the length of chain that goes in or out. Now everything is ready for the new windlass to be put in place. Let's feed the chain through. First I want to make a test to see how accurate the chain counter is actually. And yeah, the accuracy is okay. And there you have it, the new electronic windlass is finally installed. This turned out to require way more time and labor than I initially expected. At the same time, it turned out better than I even hoped for. And just look how tight of a fit it is. If the windlass were just a tiny bit bigger, it wouldn't have fit. But luckily, that's not the case. So feast your eyes on our brand new electronic windlass. Now that everything is ready, we can connect the anchor back to the chain. Are you tired of hoisting your anchor with manual labor? Having to resort to child labor to get it done without getting your hands dirty? Well, let me show you a different way. Next, I'm going to install this deck passage to pass the cables from our solar panels to the inside of the boat. This is the location where I chose to put it. So let's get started by drilling the big hole for the cables. For this, I'm using a 30mm hole saw drill. Then I remove the sharp edges to prevent the cables from getting damaged by vibrations. Next, I mark the spots for where to drill the holes for the screws of the deck passage itself. And then I drill those holes. Now all the holes have been drilled, plus one too many by mistake. I cut a custom rubber gasket out of 2mm rubber. Which I then glue to the base of the deck passage with Sikaflex 552. I then put another round of Sikaflex on the bottom of the rubber gasket, just to make sure everything is absolutely watertight. Next, I'm attempting to screw down the base of the deck passage by turning the screws directly into the holes in the steel, but that turned out not to work as the holes seemed to be too small and the screws would break. So I had to take everything out again and use bolts and nuts instead. Next, I can feed the solar cables through. and get them all the way back down into the engine room. So I can connect them to the MPPT controllers. Finally, I can put the lid on the deck passage and with that, it's done. For our next job, we have to go down, way down to the bottom of the engine room, where I want to replace the fittings of the diesel tank and create a new fuel line. First, I need to empty the tank. Luckily, it was already almost empty, so all I had to remove was the remaining few liters. Next, I'm going to assemble the new fittings with different adapters and a tap. This time I'm using Teflon tape to seal the threads. I had some trouble finding a proper adapter for the old thread size, and after buying several adapters which didn't fit, I ended up simply using 5200 marine sealant to glue an adapter that kind of fit onto the thread that was sticking out of the diesel tank. I then let this cure for about 2 weeks before screwing on the new fitting. Here too I'm using Teflon tape in the exact right amount to make sure that the tab is turned upright. I got a new diesel filter with a built-in water separator. Because water is heavier than diesel, it will collect here in the bottom and can be removed through the built-in drain. I'm using regular metal angles for woodworking to build a mount for the new fuel filter. Sometimes I like to take the easy route. I then screw these angles to the diesel filter, of course not without using thread locker on all the threads. And so this is now ready to be installed. Next I'm gonna add some diesel into the main big diesel tank. And I know I should get the proper tool to open the cap, which in the meantime I found. So let's see if something's coming out. Apparently not. So I removed the tap again and had a closer look and saw that the 5200 had dripped down and completely plugged the hole. But I was able to cut out that plug quite easily and put the tap back. Next, I'm going to install the new fuel hoses, for which I'm using transparent tubes. Now we can finally open the tap and see with great pleasure that diesel is coming out. Next, let's install the line from the diesel filter to the engine. Here, at the engine's first fuel pump, I have to make sure that the new fuel hose fits the old adapter. I actually bought a new one, but I didn't want to take the risk to remove the old one, so at first I tried if I can make it work with the existing fitting. As you can see, it's way thinner than the diameter of the hose, so what I came up with is to simply use some shrink tube a couple of those onto the old fitting, and so the new fuel hose fit. Next, I open up the fuel line slightly above the pump. The last thing to do is to pump the diesel manually all the way up to the diesel pump here, hoping that in this way we can limit the amount of air being trapped in the fuel line, so we can avoid having to bleed the fuel line of the engine. And there you have it. There is diesel throughout the entire new fuel line. And so the next step will be to run the engine and see if it manages to get the diesel from the diesel tank all on its own. But for that, you're gonna have to wait for a future video. See you there!